It all started on an ordinary Tuesday, or so I thought. I was coming home from work after a grueling day, the kind that leaves your bones aching, your mind foggy, and all you want is a warm meal and the comfort of your own space. My wife, Jessica, was sitting on the couch as usual, flicking through her phone. She glanced up briefly when I walked in, offering me a quick smile before returning to whatever it was she was doing. I didn't think much of it at first. Things had been a little off between us lately, but I chalked it up to the usual stresses of life. We had 2 kids, a mortgage, and the daily grind. Little did I know that this particular Tuesday was the beginning of the end. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I noticed the small, seemingly insignificant details that started adding up. Jessica began staying out later, claiming she was meeting friends or working late. But something didn't sit right with me. I would come home to find her phone face down on the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up with messages from an unknown number. She'd quickly grab it and walk out of the room, leaving me to wonder. The small signs of her growing distance were becoming harder to ignore. But it wasn't just the late nights and secretive phone behavior, it was the change in her attitude. There was a coldness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a detachment that sent a chill through me every time I tried to engage in a conversation. I tried to brush it off at first. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe she was just tired of the monotony. But as time passed, I couldn't deny the sinking feeling in my gut that something was wrong. One evening, I came home earlier than usual, hoping to catch her before she slipped out for another one of her girls' nights. As I opened the door, I froze. There, sitting on the couch with her, was a man I didn't recognize. He was leaning in a little too close, laughing at something she had just said, his hand resting on the back of her neck. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was going on. The image of them together hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, unseen, for a few moments, my mind racing. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but a cold, calculating part of me stopped me. Instead, I did nothing. I turned around and quietly walked out the door. My heart was pounding in my chest as I drove around the block, trying to collect my thoughts. I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't confront her just yet. I needed to be smarter about it. If she was going to play me for a fool, I would show her what happens when you underestimate someone. Over the next few days, I started watching. I kept track of her movements, paying attention to the times she was out late and who she was texting. It didn't take long before I discovered a pattern. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she was meeting the same man at the same coffee shop. His name, I later learned, was Tom, a name that sent a sickening wave of realization through me every time I saw it flash on her phone. This was no longer a matter of suspicion. It was a full-blown affair, and the realization tore me apart. But instead of confronting her, I decided to play the long game. I would gather evidence, build my case, and when the time was right, I would expose her for the world to see. I began recording her phone calls and secret meetings, capturing every little slip of the tongue, every whispered confession. It felt wrong at first, but the more I listened, the more I realized that this wasn't just about her betrayal, it was about me taking back control. She had taken me for granted, and now it was time for her to feel the weight of her actions. I knew the perfect way to make her understand the depth of the betrayal she had inflicted upon me. I would make her regret this, without lifting a finger. I spent the next few weeks gathering every piece of evidence I could find, carefully planning my next move. The dinner party I would throw would be the ultimate payback. It would be my moment to expose her for who she truly was, to show everyone the woman behind the mask of innocence she had worked so hard to maintain. The idea came to me one evening as I sat at the kitchen table, going through the final batch of recordings I had collected. Jessica had no idea that I knew everything. Her late-night meetings, the secretive phone calls, the quiet whispers in the dark, it was all there, in those recordings. The thought of confronting her directly had crossed my mind more than once, but I knew that would give her the chance to weasel her way out, to make excuses, to lie her way out of the situation. No. I needed a plan that would make her own guilt suffocate her, a way to expose her without a single word from me. The dinner party would be that plan. I spent the next few days carefully orchestrating the details. I knew Jessica well enough to predict her reactions. I invited a few of our closest friends, people she trusted and considered her confidants, without raising any suspicion. It was going to be a regular dinner party, the kind we had hosted many times before, filled with laughter, good food, and even better wine. But this time, there would be a twist. A very public, very humiliating twist. I made sure to keep my composure. Every time Jessica asked me about the dinner, I played it off as if everything was normal. She never suspected a thing. In fact, she seemed excited about the evening. This was her world, her social circle, the people she cared about. She wanted everything to go perfectly, as if she could still pretend to be the perfect wife. I could almost hear the irony in my head. The night before the dinner party, I took one last look at my hidden stash of recordings. I had already uploaded them to my laptop, ready to be played for an audience. I was meticulous about the details. Each clip was carefully labeled, timed perfectly to create the most impactful moment. I knew exactly when to pause for effect, when to let the room fill with tension. It was almost an art form at this point, crafting the perfect moment of exposure, the moment where her entire facade would come crashing down. I set up a projector in the living room. It was hidden away behind a small decorative screen, making it look as if it was just part of the ambience for the evening. The room would be filled with laughter and chatter, and then suddenly, without warning, the projector would flick on, and the sounds of Jessica's secret life would fill the room. I couldn't help but smile as I thought about it. Jessica was still oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. The next day, everything was set. The wine was chilling in the fridge, the appetizers were prepped, and the table was set to perfection. The guests began to arrive just as the evening began to take shape. We laughed, exchanged pleasantries, and pretended that everything was just as it always had been. I played my part, doing my best to remain the charming host, making sure everyone felt at ease. But in the back of my mind, I could already hear the recordings, building the anticipation for the inevitable moment when the truth would be revealed. It didn't take long for Jessica to settle into her familiar role, smiling, chatting with the guests, and making sure everyone had everything they needed. It was almost as if she had forgotten the dark secret lurking beneath the surface. She was so confident in her ability to keep up the charade. And why wouldn't she be? She had been getting away with it for months. But tonight, the game was over. The truth would be laid bare, and there would be no hiding from it. As the evening progressed, I waited for the right moment. I let the conversation flow, allowing the wine to do its work, making everyone feel relaxed and comfortable. Then, I dropped the bombshell. "Hey, everyone," I said, standing up with a glass of wine in hand. "I thought we'd spice things up a bit. I've got a little surprise for Jessica." Jessica looked up, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "What do you mean?" she asked, smiling as if she didn't already know what was coming. "Oh, you'll see," I replied, giving her a sly grin. I walked over to the projector, my heart beating in my chest. I clicked a button on my remote, and the room was suddenly filled with the sound of Jessica's voice. The first clip started, and I watched as her smile faltered, her face slowly draining of color. The conversation on the screen was between Jessica and Tom. It was innocent enough at first, a simple exchange about meeting at a coffee shop. But as the conversation continued, things took a more intimate turn. The words, "I miss you," were exchanged, followed by laughter and soft whispers. I could feel the room tense up, the guests exchanging confused glances. Jessica's hand went to her mouth, her face turning pale. "Wait a second," I said, my voice cutting through the growing tension. "Let's keep going, shall we?" The next clip was even more damning. It was a recording of Jessica and Tom discussing their plans for the weekend, planning a trip to a secluded cabin where they could be alone. The laughter in her voice, the tenderness in her words, it was all there, a stark contrast to the image of the loving wife she had been presenting to everyone for months. Jessica's face twisted in disbelief as the recordings continued to play. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was frozen, a deer caught in the headlights of her own guilt. I didn't need to say anything more. The silence in the room spoke volumes. Jessica had been caught. There was no denying it anymore. The room was filled with awkward glances, uncomfortable shifting in seats. Her friends, the people she trusted most, were now witnesses to her betrayal. And as I looked around the room, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. This was it. This was the moment that would haunt her forever. She had no escape. The room was thick with tension. The kind of silence that crawls under your skin and makes every second feel like an eternity. Jessica stood frozen, her face pale, her hand still clutching her wine glass as if it could somehow shield her from the reality unfolding before her. I didn't look at her directly, I didn't need to. I was focused on the reactions of our friends, the people who had no idea what was really going on behind the closed doors of our marriage. Their expressions were a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and, if I'm being honest, a touch of voyeuristic curiosity. One by one, they looked at Jessica, as if waiting for her to explain herself, to offer some kind of justification. But she couldn't. There was no defense, no excuse that would make the scene they were watching any less damning. The clips played on, each one revealing more of the affair, more of her lies. I could feel her eyes on me now, desperate, pleading. She wanted me to stop. She wanted me to spare her the humiliation, to rewind the tape and pretend none of it had ever happened. But I wasn't about to give her that. This wasn't for me anymore. This was for her, to let her see what it felt like to be exposed, to be vulnerable, the way she had made me feel every day for months. I took a slow sip of my own wine, letting the bitter taste settle on my tongue as I watched her unravel. Her carefully constructed image, the one she had so painstakingly cultivated, was crumbling in front of her. The woman who had once been my partner, the mother of our children, the one I had trusted with my heart, was now a stranger. Her facade was gone, and all that remained was the truth. Her hand trembled as she set her glass down on the table, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "Mark, please," her voice was small, barely above a whisper, but I heard the desperation in it. She was pleading with me now, not to expose her any further, not to let this moment become the disaster I knew it was destined to be. But I wasn't interested in saving her anymore. I had spent too long being the one who gave, the one who sacrificed, the one who overlooked the cracks in our relationship. Tonight, the tables had turned. This was the payback she had earned, and I was going to make sure she felt every ounce of it. "Please," she repeated, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen." It was too late for apologies. It had been too late the moment she decided to betray me, the moment she made the choice to live a lie while I was left in the dark. Her words meant nothing to me now. They were just a desperate attempt to regain control, to rewrite the narrative she had been living in her head. But she had lost that right. "I think everyone's seen enough," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. I clicked the remote, stopping the final recording from playing. The screen went black, and the silence that followed felt even more suffocating. For a long moment, no one spoke. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of what to do, how to react. I could see the pity in their eyes, but there was no sympathy. No one came to her defense. Not even the friends she had considered her closest confidants. One of them, Sarah, finally broke the silence. Her voice was tentative, but there was no mistaking the judgment in her tone. "Jessica, how could you?" Jessica turned to her, her face still pale, but her lips pressed into a thin line. "You don't understand," she said, her voice almost frantic. "It was just a mistake. I was confused, and it—" "Stop," I cut her off, my words sharp. "There's no excuse for this. You had every opportunity to be honest, to come to me, to talk about whatever it was that was missing. But instead, you chose to deceive me. You chose to destroy everything we built. The words were harsh, but they were the truth. I could see it in her eyes, the regret, the shame, the realization that there was no turning back. Her world had just imploded, and there was no place left for her to hide. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. But it wasn't the apology I wanted to hear. It wasn't the apology I needed. It was too little, too late. The guests, sensing the finality of the moment, began to stand up, awkwardly gathering their things. There was no need for further confrontation, everyone had seen what they needed to see. Jessica's betrayal had been laid bare, and there was nothing left to salvage. The dinner party that was supposed to be a celebration had turned into a courtroom, and Jessica was the defendant, exposed for the world to see. As the last guest left, I stood in the living room, staring at Jessica. She was sitting on the couch now, her head buried in her hands, her body shaking with silent sobs. Part of me felt a flicker of something, maybe guilt, maybe a hint of sympathy, but I quickly shut it down. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. "You're not getting away with this," I said, my voice cold, devoid of any warmth. "This is only the beginning." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, but there was nothing in them but fear. She knew, as well as I did, that things would never be the same. The trust we once had was gone, shattered by her own actions. And now, she would have to face the reality of her betrayal, one painful step at a time. As I turned and walked toward the door, I couldn't help but feel a sense of finality wash over me. I had done what needed to be done. The truth was out, and there was no turning back for either of us. The days following the dinner party were a blur. Jessica didn't speak much after that night. Her attempts to apologize, to explain herself, were met with silence. I didn't need to hear her excuses anymore. The damage had been done. She had shown me who she really was, and it was a version of her that I didn't recognize, a version that I couldn't forgive. I kept my distance, as much as I could. I went through the motions of daily life, taking care of the kids, going to work, making sure everything appeared normal on the surface. But beneath it all, there was a quiet storm. The anger simmered beneath my calm exterior, and I knew it wouldn't be long before I had to make my next move. The shock had worn off, and now the reality of our situation was setting in. I couldn't stay in this marriage any longer. I didn't want to. Jessica, on the other hand, seemed to be unraveling. She spent most of her time holed up in our bedroom, crying or pacing, or trying to reach out to me. But I wouldn't take her calls. I wouldn't engage with her. She had crossed a line that couldn't be erased with a few tearful apologies. One evening, as I was getting ready to head out to meet a few friends at a local bar, I came downstairs to find her waiting for me in the living room. She was sitting on the couch, her hands wringing together, her face etched with exhaustion. "Mark," she said softly, her voice tentative, "please, we need to talk." I stopped in my tracks, looking at her with a mixture of indifference and frustration. "We've talked enough, Jessica. What else is there to say?" She swallowed hard, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I'm begging you, just give me a chance to explain. Please." I felt a surge of irritation rise in my chest. "Explain what?" "How you've been lying to me for months. How you've been sneaking around behind my back, betraying me with someone else." My voice was calm, but there was a steel edge to it. "There's nothing to explain, Jessica. You did what you did. And now you have to live with it." She flinched at my words, but she didn't back down. "I know. I know I've hurt you, but this isn't what I wanted. I didn't want to lose you. I love you, Mark." I stared at her, not knowing whether to feel angry or just utterly exhausted. "You don't get to say that. You don't get to come here and tell me you love me after everything. You broke my trust, Jessica. You shattered it. And now you want me to just forget all of it because you say you love me? Her eyes welled with tears again, and she reached out toward me. Please, don't do this. Don't walk away from us. I'll do anything. I'll change. I'll prove to you that I can be the wife you deserve. I shook my head slowly. It's too late for that. I could see her struggling to hold it together, but I wasn't moved. I had already made up my mind. I had already accepted that this was over. There was no coming back from this. She had pushed me too far, and now, the only thing I felt was resentment. I can't stay with you anymore, Jessica, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Not after everything that's happened. You've made your choice, and now so have I. Her face crumpled, and she let out a strangled sob. Please, don't leave me. I'll fix this. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. But I couldn't hear her anymore. I turned and walked toward the door. It's over, Jessica. I'm done. As I walked out into the night, I could feel the weight of the decision settling on my shoulders. It felt like a relief, but there was also a lingering sense of loss. I wasn't the same person who had stood at the altar with her all those years ago. I had changed. And so had she. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized, someone who had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going back. Not to her. Not to the lies. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and arrangements. I had already contacted a lawyer, and we were beginning the process of dividing our assets and figuring out custody arrangements for the kids. It was a logistical nightmare, but I did it with a sense of detached focus. There was no room for emotions anymore. I had to be pragmatic, to keep my eyes on the goal. But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. It was as if the foundation of everything I had built had been ripped away, and I was left standing in the wreckage, unsure of what to do next. The house felt so much emptier now that Jessica wasn't there. The silence was deafening. And while I knew that this was the right decision, a part of me still longed for the family I had once dreamed of. One afternoon, after I had just finished signing some paperwork at the lawyer's office, I got a text message from an unknown number. I opened it, and my heart skipped a beat. It was from Jessica. Mark, I'm sorry. I'll always regret what I did to you. I just hope one day you can forgive me. I stared at the message for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. But there was no forgiveness to be found. Not from me. Not now. I deleted the message without responding. There was no more room for her in my life. Not anymore. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control. The storm had passed, and now I had to rebuild. And this time, I wouldn't make the same mistake again. The weeks that followed Jessica's departure were a slow, deliberate process of regaining my sense of self. The house felt like a shell without her, quiet, desolate, and foreign, but as each day passed, I started to find a rhythm again. I had been living in a state of numbness for so long that the sudden flood of emotions was almost overwhelming. But I had made a promise to myself that I would never fall back into the pit of despair I had spent too much time in. This was my chance to rebuild, to take back everything she had taken from me. The kids were with me most of the time, and I focused on being there for them, making sure they felt safe and loved. Jessica, despite her betrayal, had been an excellent mother, and I knew I had to step up and provide that same stability for them. But in the quiet moments when I was alone, the anger would surface again. It was a deep, seething kind of rage, the kind that made me want to scream at the world for what had happened to me, for the way Jessica had violated my trust. But I didn't scream. I didn't act out. Instead, I channeled that anger into something productive. I started hitting the gym more regularly, using the weight and repetition to work through the pain. There was something therapeutic about pushing my body to its limits, about feeling the burn of muscles working in sync. It was a release, a way to exert control over my own life when everything had once seemed so chaotic. I would leave the gym feeling exhausted, but oddly at peace, as if I had done something good for myself. And then there were the nights. Those were the hardest. When the kids were asleep, and the house was still, I would find myself sitting in the quiet, thinking. The memories of Jessica, the good ones, the bad ones, would flood my mind. I tried to focus on the positives, on the fact that I was finally free from the shackles of betrayal, but there were moments when I still missed her. It was a strange sensation, to miss someone who had hurt you so deeply, but I couldn't help it. There had been love once. And maybe that was what made it all the more painful to let go. But every time I thought about her, I would remind myself why I had made this choice. She had shattered everything. The trust, the partnership, the love we had shared, it was all gone. And no amount of apologies, no matter how sincere, could ever bring it back. She had made her bed, and now she would have to lie in it. One night, as I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, I received a message that jolted me back to reality. It was from Sarah, one of the few friends who had seen the recordings. "Mark," she wrote, "I just wanted to check in on you. How are you holding up?" I paused for a moment, reading the words. Sarah had been quiet since the dinner party, and her message felt like a lifeline, a reminder that there were still people who cared about me, who hadn't judged me for what had happened. I took a deep breath before responding, tapping out the words carefully. "I'm getting there. It's been hard, but I'm trying to focus on the kids, on moving forward." She replied almost immediately. "You're doing the right thing, Mark. I just want you to know that I'm here for you. Always." Her words were a small comfort in the midst of the storm, a reminder that I wasn't alone. But even as I felt a flicker of warmth from her kindness, I knew that I wasn't ready to let anyone back into my life, not yet. I had spent too long putting everyone else's needs above my own. This time, I needed to focus on me. Over the next few weeks, I poured myself into my work, taking on more projects and staying busy. I had always been good at my job, but now, it was more than that. It was a distraction, a way to keep my mind occupied so I didn't have to dwell on the past. I was determined to make something of myself, to prove that I was stronger than what had happened to me. Every email I sent, every meeting I attended, was a step toward reclaiming control. But there were moments, late at night when the house was quiet and the world outside felt distant, when I found myself wondering if I would ever feel whole again. Jessica had been my partner for so long, and even now, I felt the emptiness that her absence had left behind. The house, the family, the memories, they were all still there, but they felt hollow. The guilt started to creep in during those quiet moments. Was I doing the right thing? Was it possible to rebuild a life from the wreckage, or was I destined to be haunted by the past forever? But every time that doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the dinner party. The way Jessica's face had twisted in shock and horror as her secret life was exposed. The way she had begged for forgiveness when it was too late. That was the woman she had become, the woman who had chosen to destroy everything we had built for her own selfish desires. And so, I pushed on. I focused on being the best father I could be, on keeping my mind sharp and my body in shape. I built new routines, new habits, things that didn't remind me of the life I had shared with Jessica. I started going out with friends more often, rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried beneath the weight of our marriage. It was liberating in a way, to feel like I was finally free, to realize that I didn't have to carry the burden of her betrayal anymore. But the hardest part was still ahead of me, the final confrontation. The day I would officially end things, the day I would make it clear that there was no coming back. The paperwork for the divorce had been filed, and now it was just a matter of waiting. I could feel the pressure building, the anticipation of that final moment when everything would be over. But in the meantime, I held my head high, determined to move forward, no matter how difficult it was. And as I stood in front of the mirror one morning, looking at the man who had emerged from the ashes of his former life, I realized something important: I had come out stronger. I had survived this betrayal, and I would continue to survive. I had control now, of my life, my future, and my peace of mind. And no one, not Jessica, not anyone, could take that away from me. The storm had passed. And now, I was ready to embrace the calm. Time had a strange way of working in my new reality. Days passed like they had before, mundane, ordinary, but each one felt heavier, more significant than the last. I had been living in a sort of limbo, caught between the past I was trying to leave behind and the future I was slowly trying to build. The kids were adjusting to their new routines, and I had taken on the mantle of both mother and father, doing the best I could. There were moments of joy, of laughter, but underneath it all, there was always that simmering resentment, toward Jessica, toward myself for not seeing the signs sooner, and toward the life we had shared that now felt like a ghost. As the days stretched on, I found myself thinking more and more about what would come next. The divorce was inevitable, Jessica had already moved out, and the legal proceedings had begun. There was no longer any question about whether or not we would stay together. I had made peace with the fact that I was done, that we were done. But there was still a lingering feeling, something in the back of my mind, that wasn't going to allow me to truly move on until I had one final confrontation. It wasn't just about the paperwork, the legalities, or the logistics of dividing everything we had built together. It was about closure. I needed her to know that what she had done was unforgivable, not just because of the affair, but because of the way she had disrespected me, the way she had taken everything I had given her for granted. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about putting an end to this chapter once and for all. And so, I decided that the final step would be a face-to-face meeting, a conversation that would end everything. I called Jessica one afternoon, after the kids had gone to bed. Her name flashed across my phone, and for a moment, I hesitated. But I pressed accept, and the phone rang once before she answered. "Mark?" Her voice was tentative, as if she wasn't sure what kind of conversation we were about to have. "Can we meet?" I asked, my voice firm but not cold. "There's something we need to talk about." I don't know if I can handle another confrontation," she said, her voice cracking. "I know I messed up, and I'm so sorry." I cut her off, not out of anger, but because I didn't need to hear it anymore. "I don't want to talk about the past anymore, Jessica. We're beyond that. I just need you to meet me. There's something I need to say." After a long pause, she finally agreed. "Okay. When and where?" "Tomorrow. We'll meet at the park near the lake. It'll be calm, quiet. Just you and me." "All right. I'll be there." I hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. This was it, the moment that would close this chapter, the moment when I would look her in the eye and finally say everything I had been holding back. The final confrontation had been a long time coming, and I was ready. The next day, I arrived at the park a little early, pacing by the lake while I waited for her. The cool breeze carried the scent of fresh earth and leaves, the kind of serene atmosphere that I knew would make this conversation harder for her to avoid. This wasn't going to be a shouting match. It wasn't going to be about throwing blame around. This was my moment to stand tall, to take control of the narrative once and for all. When Jessica arrived, her face was pale, her eyes tired and red-rimmed. She had been through her own version of hell in the past few weeks, grappling with the fallout of her betrayal, her shame, and the looming reality of the divorce. But as she approached me, there was a new quietness to her, a somber recognition that this wasn't just another conversation. This was the last one. "Mark," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say." I looked at her, taking a deep breath before speaking. "You don't need to say anything. You've already said everything with your actions. She flinched at the words, but I wasn't done. I needed her to understand. I've spent a lot of time thinking about everything, about us, about our marriage, and about the person you became. You betrayed me, Jessica. You tore apart everything we had, and you did it because you were selfish. You didn't just cheat on me. You destroyed our trust, and you did it without a second thought. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand, silencing her. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to tell you something you need to hear. I won't ever forgive you for this. Not because I'm bitter, but because I don't believe you deserve it. You lost my trust, and you lost me. And now, I have to focus on moving forward, without you. Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw the full weight of the guilt she was carrying. There were no more excuses, no more explanations. She knew. She knew she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I don't want you to hate me, Mark, she said, her voice trembling. I never wanted to hurt you. I shook my head, feeling the cold finality of the words that were about to leave my lips. It's not about hate. It's about respect. And you lost that respect when you chose him over me. When you made the decision to lie, to deceive, to betray me, you sealed our fate. I'm not angry anymore, Jessica. I'm just done. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Jessica stood there for a moment, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs, but I didn't move. I didn't reach out to comfort her. I wasn't her partner anymore. And I wasn't the man who had once loved her without question. Finally, I turned and began walking away. I heard her call my name, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. As I walked away from the park, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a sense of freedom I hadn't known in months. The final chapter had been written. I had faced her. I had confronted her. And now, I was done. There would be no going back. There would be no more wondering, no more wishing things could be different. It was over. I was free. The weeks following that final conversation were a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Walking away from Jessica, from everything we had built together, wasn't easy. But in those moments of quiet, when the world around me seemed still, I knew I had made the right choice. I had reclaimed my life, but the path ahead wasn't as clear as I had hoped. In the aftermath of the divorce, I found myself standing at the crossroads of my future. The house felt emptier than ever. The echoes of our past were like ghosts, lingering in every room. Even as I moved on, the memories haunted me. The laughter, the quiet evenings spent together, the dreams we shared, all of that now felt distant, like a life lived by someone else. And yet, despite everything that had transpired, I couldn't help but miss the person I once thought Jessica was. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted. But I reminded myself every day that love wasn't enough. Trust was the foundation of any relationship, and Jessica had shattered that trust beyond repair. No amount of apologies, no matter how sincere, could undo the damage she had done. So, I focused on rebuilding, on forging a path forward for myself and for the kids. The first step in that process was focusing on my health, both mentally and physically. I threw myself into the gym even more, pushing myself harder each day. It wasn't just about getting in shape anymore, it was about reclaiming my sense of control, about proving to myself that I was stronger than my past. I ran longer distances, lifted heavier weights, and each drop of sweat felt like a small victory. The gym became my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the noise of the world and just focus on the present. But physical strength wasn't enough. I knew that. The mental toll of everything that had happened weighed heavily on me, and I realized I needed to take a step back and find balance. I began meditating more regularly, using the time to clear my mind and center myself. The quiet moments helped me reconnect with who I was, and slowly, I began to feel like I was piecing together the person I had been before Jessica had come into my life. There were nights, though, when the loneliness crept in. The silence in the house was deafening, and I found myself sitting in the dark, wishing for the warmth of human connection. I missed the intimacy of a partnership, the quiet moments shared with someone who truly knew me. But I refused to settle. I had learned the hard way that not all love was worth keeping. And the more I focused on myself, the more I realized I wasn't ready for a new relationship. I needed time to heal, to rediscover who I was without the weight of betrayal dragging me down. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat down and took a long, hard look at my life. It was strange, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of freedom. I had been walking around in a fog for months, and now, the fog was lifting. I had come out the other side of a painful chapter and had survived. I wasn't the same man I was before, but in many ways, that was a good thing. I had been tested and, despite everything, had come out stronger. I reached out to a few old friends, people I had neglected during the years I spent with Jessica. I started reconnecting, rebuilding friendships that had been put on hold. There was something comforting in those small moments of normalcy, laughter shared over drinks, long conversations that had nothing to do with my past. For the first time, I allowed myself to enjoy the simple pleasures of life without feeling guilty about it. And then, one afternoon, I received an unexpected message from Sarah. She had been one of the few people who had been there for me throughout everything, and her message brought a smile to my face. "Mark," she wrote, "I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I know it's been a tough few months, but I hope you're finding some peace." I paused before responding, considering my words carefully. "I'm doing better, Sarah. It's been a long road, but I'm starting to feel like myself again." Her response came quickly. "I'm really glad to hear that. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me." It felt good to know that people still cared, that I wasn't as alone as I sometimes felt. But I also realized that I wasn't looking for a romantic relationship. Not yet, at least. I was on a journey of rediscovery, and I knew I had to take it slow. The trust one had once placed in someone had been shattered, and now, I had to rebuild that trust with myself first. The kids, too, were adjusting. It wasn't easy for them, but I made sure they felt loved and supported. We spent more time together, doing simple things like watching movies or going to the park. There was an innocence to their laughter that reminded me of what really mattered: family. They were my anchor, my reason to keep going, to keep moving forward. I would be the father they deserved, and I wouldn't let my past define me or them. And then, one evening, as I sat down on the porch with a glass of whiskey in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I allowed myself to think about the future. What would it look like? What kind of person did I want to be? It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about thriving. It was about carving out a new path, one where I could be proud of the man I had become. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew I was headed in the right direction. In the stillness of that moment, I realized that I had finally let go of the weight of the past. Jessica had taken her place in the rearview mirror, and while I would always carry the lessons I had learned, I no longer allowed her actions to define who I was. I was free. And now, it was time to truly begin again. The next chapter was mine to write, and this time, I would write it on my own terms. The first few months after the divorce felt like a rebirth. There were still scars, invisible and not so invisible, but with each passing day, I felt a little lighter. The house, once filled with tension and the heavy atmosphere of betrayal, had started to feel like home again. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of silence, moments where I would catch myself imagining a life with Jessica and the kids all together, but those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. I had come a long way from the man who once stood at that dinner table, watching as Jessica's secrets unraveled in front of our friends. I had learned that I didn't need to hold on to the anger or the resentment. Those feelings, while understandable, were just anchors that kept me stuck in the past. And I knew I couldn't keep living like that. I was learning to release them, to focus on what I could control, the future. The kids were thriving, their smiles reminding me of the beauty in life that didn't come from the chaos of adulthood. We laughed more. We shared more. And slowly, I saw pieces of myself return in the process. The man I was before the affair, the man who had dreams, ambitions, and a sense of self-worth that wasn't tied to someone else, he was emerging again, bit by bit. One evening, I was sitting in the kitchen, sipping on a glass of wine, when I received a text from Sarah. We hadn't spoken in a while, but I had kept in touch with her through the months, and her support had meant more to me than I realized. "Hey Mark, I was thinking about you today. I know this sounds weird, but I'm proud of you. You've come a long way, and I just wanted to tell you that." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Pride. It had been so long since I had felt anything to be proud of. And there it was, someone, outside of my own head, seeing the growth I hadn't fully acknowledged myself. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the final seal of approval. It was my moment to realize that this journey, no matter how painful, had shaped me into someone new. And that new person was stronger, wiser, and most importantly, someone who could stand on his own. I quickly typed out a response. "Thank you, Sarah. Honestly, I'm just trying to figure it out one day at a time, but your words mean a lot." I sat back in my chair, feeling a wave of contentment wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone to fix things for me. I wasn't waiting for answers to come from outside. I was the one in control, deciding what my life would look like moving forward. Over the next few months, I began to embrace new opportunities, professional, personal, and social. I found myself slowly but surely becoming more involved in the community, rediscovering old passions and even picking up a few new ones. I had always been an avid runner, and I decided to take that further, signing up for a marathon that was happening 6 months from now. It was a lofty goal, but it was something that would push me out of my comfort zone, something that would challenge me and keep my mind focused on growth, rather than the weight of the past. But perhaps the biggest change was in how I began to view relationships. I had spent so many years questioning whether I could ever trust anyone again. The scars Jessica had left were deep, and I wasn't sure if I was capable of letting someone new into my life. But as I focused more on healing, I realized that trust wasn't something that was simply lost. It was something that could be rebuilt over time, piece by piece. Not immediately, but eventually. I wasn't closing myself off to the idea of love forever, just not yet. One day, while I was out on a run, I crossed paths with someone new, a woman named Anna. She was running in the opposite direction, her stride strong and confident. We exchanged smiles as we passed, but there was something about her energy that made me stop and turn around. "Hey!" I called out, jogged back toward her. "You're running pretty fast." "I'm Mark." She slowed her pace and smiled. "Thanks, Mark. I'm Anna." We began running side by side, sharing small talk at first. Our conversation flowed easily, and by the time we finished our run, we had exchanged numbers. I wasn't looking for anything romantic at that moment, but it was a sign that I was opening up again, allowing myself to connect with someone new, in a way that felt natural, unforced. The weeks that followed brought more runs with Anna, then coffee dates, then walks in the park. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It wasn't rushed. We took our time getting to know each other, and for the first time in a long time, I found myself laughing again. Not because I was forcing it, but because life, at that moment, felt good. I wasn't ready for a serious relationship, but it was nice to enjoy the company of someone who understood the value of patience. Anna didn't try to rush things or force me into anything I wasn't ready for. She just allowed me to be me, and in return, I did the same. It was a simple connection, but it felt right. And for the first time in months, I found myself thinking that maybe, just maybe, love wasn't something I had to close myself off to forever. There was still healing to be done, still more layers of the past to work through. But I had learned to embrace the future, to walk forward with open eyes and an open heart. Jessica's betrayal no longer defined me. I had become someone new, someone who had been broken, but who had healed stronger. And that strength was mine to hold on to. As I looked ahead, I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew one thing for certain: I was ready to face it. Whatever came next, I would handle it with the same resilience and determination that had carried me through the darkest days of my life. Because in the end, the greatest revenge wasn't in exposing her, wasn't in punishing her for what she did. It was in the life I was now building for myself, one that was filled with growth, peace, and the promise of a better tomorrow.